Chapter 15 Monopoly. If you own a personal computer, it probably uses some version of Windows, the operating system sold by the Microsoft Corporation. When Microsoft first designed Windows many years ago, it applied for and received a copyright from the government. The copyright gives Microsoft the exclusive right to make and sell copies of the Windows operating system. If a person wants to buy a copy of Windows, she has little choice but to give Microsoft the approximately $100 that the firm has decided to charge for its product. Microsoft is said to have monopoly in the market for Windows. Microsoft business decisions are not well described by the model of firm behavior we developed in the previous chapter. In that chapter, we analyzed competitive markets in which many firms offer essentially identical products, so each firm has little influence over the price it receives. By contrast, a monopoly such as Microsoft has no close competitors and therefore has the power to influence the market price of its product. Whereas a competitive firm is a price taker, a monopoly firm is a price maker. In this chapter, we examine the implications of this market power. We will see that market power alters the relationship between a firm's cost and price at which it sells its product. A competitive firm takes the price of its output as given by the market, then chooses the quantity it will supply so that price equals marginal cost. By contrast, a monopoly charges a price that exceeds marginal cost. Sure enough, we observe this practice in the case of Microsoft Windows. The marginal cost of Windows, the extra cost that Microsoft incurs by downloading one more copy of the program into a CD, is only a few dollars. The market price of Windows is many times its marginal cost. It is not surprising that monopolies charge high prices for their products. Customers of monopolies might seem to have little choice but to pay whatever the monopoly charges. But if so, why does a copy of Windows not cost $1,000 or $10,000? The reason is that if Microsoft were to set the price that high, fewer people would buy the product. People would buy fewer computers, switch to other operating systems, or make illegal copies. A monopoly firm can control the price of the good it sells. But because a high price reduces the quantity that its customers buy, the monopoly's profit are not unlimited. As we examine the production and pricing decision of monopolies, we also consider the implications of monopoly for society as a whole. Monopoly firms, like competitive firms, aim to maximize product, but this goal has very different ramification for competitive and monopoly firms. In competitive markets, self-interested consumers and producers reach an equilibrium that promotes general economic well-being as if guided by an invisible hand. By contrast, because monopoly firms are unchecked by competition, the outcome in a market with a monopoly is often not in the best interest of society. One of the 10 principles of economics in chapter 1 is that government can sometimes improve market outcomes. The analysis in this chapter shed more light on this principle as we examine the problems that monopolies raise for society. We discuss the various ways in which government policymakers might respond to these problems. The US government, for example, keeps a close eye on Microsoft business decisions. In 1994, it blocked Microsoft from buying Intuit, a leading seller of personal finance software, on the grounds that combining the two firms would concentrate too much market power. Similarly, in 1998, the US Department of Justice objected when Microsoft started integrating its internet browser into its Windows operating system, claiming that this addition would extend the firm's market power into new areas. In recent years, regulators in United States and abroad have shifted their focus to firms with growing market power, such as Google and Samsung, but continue to monitor Microsoft compliance with the antitrust laws. Monopolies arise. A firm is a monopoly if it is the sole seller of its product and if its product does not have any close substitutes. The fundamental cause of monopoly is barriers to entry. A monopoly remains the only seller in its market because other firms cannot enter the market and compete with it. Barriers to entry, in turn, have three main sources. Monopoly resources. A key resource required for production is owned by a single firm. Government regulation. The government gives a single firm the exclusive right to produce some goods or services. The production process. A single firm can produce output at a lower cost than can a larger number of firms. Let's briefly discuss each of these. Monopoly resources. The simplest way for a monopoly to arise is for a single firm to own a key resource. For example, consider the market for water in a small town. If dozens of towns residents have working wells, the model of competitive markets discussed in the preceding chapter describes the behavior of sellers. Competition among suppliers drive the price of a gallon of water to equal the marginal cost of pumping an extra gallon. But if there is only one well in town and it is impossible to get water from anywhere else, then the owner of the well has monopoly on water. Not surprisingly, the monopolist has much greater market power than any single firm in a competitive market. In the case of a necessity like water, the monopolist can command quite a high price even if the marginal cost of pumping an extra gallon is low. A classic example of market power arising from the ownership of key resource is De Beers, the South African diamond company. Founded in 1888 by Cecil Rhodes, an English businessman and benefactor of Rhodes Scholarship. De Beers has at times control up to 80% of the production from the world's diamond mines. Because its market share is less than 100%. De Beers is not exactly a monopoly, but the company has nonetheless exerted substantial influence over the market price of diamond. Although exclusive ownership of a key resource is a potential cause of monopoly, in practice monopolies rarely arise for this reason. Economies are larger and resources are owned by many people. The natural scope of many markets is worldwide because goods are often traded internationally. There are therefore few examples of firms that own a resource of which there are no close substitutes. Government created monopolies. In many cases, monopolies arise because the government has given one person or firm the exclusive right to sell some goods or service. Sometimes the monopoly arises from the sheer political clout of the would-be monopolist. Kings, for example, once granted exclusive business licenses to their friends and allies. At other times, the government grants a monopoly because doing so is viewed to be in the public interest. The patent and copyright laws are two important examples. When a pharmaceutical company discovers a new drug, it can apply to government for a patent. If the government deems the drug to be truly original, it approves the patent, which gives the company the exclusive right to manufacture and sell the drug for 20 years. Similarly, when a novelist finished a book, she can copyright it. The copyright is a government guarantee that no one can print and sell the work without of the author's permission. The copyright makes the novelist a monopolist in the sale of her novel. The effects of patent and copyright laws are easy to see. Because these laws give one producer a monopoly, they lead to higher price than would occur under the competition. But by allowing these monopoly producers to charge higher prices and earn higher profits, the laws also encourage some desirable behavior. Drug companies are allowed to be monopolists in the drug they discover to encourage research. Authors are allowed to be monopolists in the sale of their books to encourage them to write more and better books. Thus, the laws governing patents and copyrights have both benefits and costs. The benefits of the patent and copyright laws are the increased incentives for creative activity. These benefits are offset to some extent by the cost of monopoly pricing, which we examine later in this chapter. Natural monopolies. An industry is a natural monopoly when a single firm can supply a good or service to an entire market at a lower cost than could two or more firms. Natural monopoly arises when there are economies of scale over the relevant range of output. Figure 1 shows the average total cost of a firm with economies of scale. In this case, a single firm can produce any amount of output at the lowest cost. That is, for any given amount of output, a larger number of firms lead to less output per firm and higher average total cost. An example of a natural monopoly is the distribution of water. To provide water to residents of a town, a firm must build a network of pipes throughout. The firm would have to pay the fixed cost of building a network. Thus, the average total cost of water is lowest if a single firm serves the entire market. We saw other examples of natural monopoly when we discussed public goods and common resources in chapter 11. We noted that club goods are excludable but not rival in consumption. An example is a bridge used to infrequently, that is, it is never congested. The bridge is excludable because a toll collector can prevent someone from using it. The bridge is not rival in consumption because use of bridge by one person does not diminish the ability of others to use it, because there is a large fixed cost of building a bridge and negligible marginal cost of additional users. The average total cost of a trip across the bridge, the total cost divided by the number of trips, falls as the number of trips rises. Hence, the bridge is natural monopoly. When a firm is natural monopoly, it is less concerned about new entrants eroding its monopoly power. Normally, a firm has trouble maintaining a monopoly position without ownership of a key resource or protection from the government. The monopolist's profit attracts entrants into the market, and these entrants make the market more competitive. By contrast, entering a market in which other firms has natural monopoly is unattractive. Would-be entrants know that they cannot achieve the same low cost that the monopolist enjoy, because after entry, each firm would have smaller piece of the market. In some cases, the size of the market is one determinant of whether an industry is a natural monopoly. Again, consider a bridge across a river. When the population is small, the bridge may be natural monopoly. A single bridge can satisfy the entire demand for trip across the river at the lowest cost. Yet, as population grows and bridge becomes congested, satisfying the entire demand may require two or more bridges across the same river. Thus, as market expands, a natural monopoly can evolve into a more competitive markets. Quick quiz. What are the three reasons that a market might have a monopoly? Give two examples of monopolies and explain the reason for each. How monopolies make production and pricing decision. Now that we know how monopolies arise, we can consider how a monopoly firm decides how much of its product to make and what price to charge for it. The analysis of monopoly behavior in this section is the starting point for evaluating whether monopolies are desirable and what policies the government might pursue in monopoly markets. Monopoly versus competition. The key difference between a competitive firm and a monopoly is the monopoly's ability to influence the price of its output. A competitive firm is small relative to the market in which it operates and therefore has no power to influence the price of its output. It takes the price as given by market conditions. By contrast, because a monopoly is the sole producer in its market, it can alter the price of its good by adjusting the quantity it supplies to the market. One way to view this difference between a competitive firm and a monopoly is to consider the demand curve that each firm faces. When we analyzed profit maximization by competitive firm in the preceding chapter, we drew the market price as horizontal line. Because a competitive firm can sell as much or as little as it wants at this price, the competitive firm faces a horizontal demand curve. As in panel figure 2, in effect, because the competitive firm sells a product with many perfect substitutes, the products of all the other firm in its market. The demand curve that any one firm faces is perfectly elastic. By contrast, because the monopoly is the sole producer in its market, its demand curves is the market demand curve. Thus, the monopolistic demand curve slopes downward as in panel B of figure 2. If the monopolist raises the price of its good, consumers buy less of it. Looked at another way, if the monopolist reduces the quantity of output it produces and sells, the price of its output increases. The market demand curve provides a constraint on a monopoly's ability to profit from its market power. A monopolist would prefer if it were possible to charge a high price and sell large quantity at that high price. The market demand curve makes that outcome impossible. In particular, the market demand curve describes the combination of price and quantity that are available to a monopoly firm. By adjusting the quantity produced or equivalently the price charged, the monopolist can choose any point on the demand curve, but it cannot choose a point of the demand curve. What price and quantity of output will the monopolist choose? As with competitive firms, we assume that the monopolist's goal is to maximize profit because the firm's profit is total revenue minus total cost. Our next task is explaining monopoly behavior is to examine a monopolist's revenue. A monopoly's revenue. Consider a town with a single producer of water. Table 1 shows how the monopoly's revenue might depend on the amount of water produced. Column 1 and 2 show the monopolist's demand schedule. If the monopolist produces 1 gallon of water, it can sell that gallon for $10. If it produces 2 gallons, it must lower the price to $9 to sell both gallons. If it produces 3 gallons, it must lower the price to $8 and so on. If you graphed these two columns of numbers, you would get a typical downward sloping demand curve. Column 3 of the table presents the monopolist's total revenue. It equals the quantity sold from column 1 times the price from column 2. Column 4 computes the firm average revenue. The amount of revenue the firm receives per unit sold. We compute average revenue by taking the number for total revenue in column 3 and dividing it by the quantity of output in column 1. As we discussed in the previous chapter, average revenue always equals the price of the good. This is true for monopolists as well as for competitive firm. Column 5 of table 1 computes the firm marginal revenue, the amount of revenue that the firm receives for each additional unit of output. We compute marginal revenue by taking the change in total revenue when output increases by 1 unit. For example, when the firm is producing 3 gallons of water, it receives total revenue of $24. Raising the production to 4 gallon increases total revenue to $28. Thus, marginal revenue from the sale of the 4th gallon is $28 minus $24 or $4. Table 1 shows a result that is important for understanding monopoly behavior. A monopolist's marginal revenue is less than the price of its good. For example, if the firm raises production of water from 3 to 4 gallons, it increases total revenue by only $4, even though it sells each gallon for $7. For a monopoly, marginal revenue is lower than price because a monopoly faces a downward sloping demand curve. To increase the amount sold, a monopoly firm must lower the price it charges to all customers. Hence, to sell the 4th gallon of water, the monopolist must earn $1 less revenue for each of the first 3 gallons. This $3 loss accounts for the difference between the price of the 4th gallon $7 and the marginal revenue of that 4th gallon $4. Marginal revenue for monopolies is very different from marginal revenue for competitive firms. When a monopoly increases the amount it sells, this action has two effects on total revenue, P into Q. The output effect. More output is sold, so Q is higher, which tends to increase total revenue. The price effect. The price falls, so P is lower, which tends to decrease total revenue. Because a competitive firm can sell all it wants at the market price, there is no price effect. When it increases production by 1 unit, it receives the market price for that unit, and it does not receive any less for the unit it was already selling. That is because the competitive firm is a price taker. Its marginal revenue equals the price of its good. By contrast, when a monopoly increases production by 1 unit, it must reduce the price it charges for every unit it sells, and this cut in price reduces revenue on the units it was already selling. As a result, a monopoly's marginal revenue is less than its price. Figure 3 graphs the demand curve and marginal revenue curve for a monopoly firm. Because the firm's price equals its average revenue, the demand curve is also the average revenue curve. These two curves always start at the Same point on the vertical axis because the marginal revenue of the first unit sold equals the price of the good. But for the reason we just discussed, the monopolist's marginal revenue on all units after the first is less than the price of the good. You can see figure 3. Revenue all units after the first it less than the price of good. Thus, a monopoly's marginal revenue curve lies below its demand curve. You can see in figure 3 as well as in table 1 that marginal revenue can even become negative. Marginal revenue is negative when the price effect on revenue is greater than the output effect. In this case, when the firm produces an extra unit of output, the price falls by enough to cause the firm's total revenue to decline, even though the firm is selling more units. Profit maximization. Now that we have considered the revenue of a monopoly firm, we are ready to examine how much a firm maximizes profit. Recall from chapter 1 that one of the 10 principles of economics is that rational people think at the margin. This lesson is as true for the monopolist as it is for competitive firms. Here we apply the logic of marginal analysis to monopolist decision about how much to produce. Figure 4 graph the demand curve, the marginal revenue curve, the cost curves for monopoly firm. All these curves seem familiar. All these curves should seem familiar. The demand and marginal revenue curves are like those in figure 3 and the cost curves are like those we encountered in last two chapters. These curves contain all the information we need to determine the level of output that a profit maximization monopolist will choose. Suppose first that the firm is producing at a low level of output such as Q1. In this case, marginal cost is less than marginal revenue. If the firm increased production by 1 unit, the additional revenue would exceed the additional cost and profit would rise. Thus, when marginal cost is less than marginal revenue, the firm can increase profit by producing more units. A similar argument applies at high level of output such as Q2. In this case, marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue. If the firm reduced production by 1 unit, the cost saved would exceed the revenue lost. Thus, if marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue, the firm can raise profit by reducing production. In the end, the firm adjusts its level by producing production until the quantity reaches Q max, at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Thus, the monopolist's profit maximizing quantity of output is determined by the intersection of the marginal revenue curve and the marginal cost curve. In figure 4, this intersection occurs at point A. You might recall from the previous chapter that competitive firms also choose the quantity of output at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. In following this rule for profit maximization, competitive firms and monopolies are alike. But there is also an important difference between these type of firms. The marginal revenue of a competitive firm equals its price, whereas the marginal revenue of a monopoly is less than its price. That is, for a competitive firm, P is equal to MR is equal to MC. For a monopoly firm, P is greater than MR is equal to MC. The equality of marginal revenue and marginal cost determines the profit maximizing quantity for both types of firm. What differs is how the price is related to marginal revenue and marginal cost. How does the monopoly find the profit maximizing price for its product? The demand curve answers this question because the demand curve relates the amount that customers are willing to pay to quantity sold. Thus, after the monopoly firm chooses the quantity of output that equates marginal revenue and marginal cost, it uses the demand curve to find the highest price it can charge for that quantity. In figure 4, the profit maximizing price is found at point B. We can now see a key difference between markets with competitive firms and market with monopoly firms. In competitive markets, price equals marginal cost. In monopolized market, price exceeds marginal cost. As we will see in a moment, this finding is crucial to understanding the social cost of monopoly. A monopoly's profit. How much profit does a monopoly make? To see a monopoly firm's profit in a graph, recall that profit equals total revenue TR minus total cost TC. Profit is equal to TR minus TC. We can rewrite this as profit is equal to TR upon Q minus TR upon Q multiplied by Q. We can rewrite this as profit is equal to TR divided by Q minus TC divided by Q multiplied by Q. TR divided by Q is average revenue, which equals the price P, and TC divided by Q is average total cost ATC. Therefore, profit is equal to P minus ATC multiplied by Q. This equation for profit, which also holds for competitive firms, allows us to measure the monopolist's profit in our graph. Consider the shadow box in figure 5. The height of the box, the segment BC, is price minus average total cost, P minus ATC, which is the profit on the typical unit sold. The width of the box, the segment DC, is the quantity sold, Q max. Therefore, the area of this box is monopoly firm's total profit. FYI, why a monopoly does not have a supply curve? You may have noticed that we have analyzed the price in a monopoly market using the market demand curve and the firm's cost curves. We have not made any mention of the market supply curve. By contrast, when we analyze prices in competitive markets, beginning in chapter 4, the two most important words were always supply and demand. What happened to the supply curve? Although monopoly firms make decisions about that quantity to supply, a monopoly does not have a supply curve. A supply curve tells us the quantity that firm choose to supply at any given price. The concept makes sense when we are analyzing competitive firms, which are price takers. But a monopoly firm is a price maker, not a price taker. It is not meaningful to ask what amount such a firm would produce at any given price because it cannot take the price as given. Instead, when the firm chooses the quantity to supply, that decision along with the demand curve determines the price. Indeed, the monopolist's decision about how much to supply is impossible to separate from the demand curve it faces. The supply of the demand curve determines the shape of the marginal revenue curve, which is in turn determines the monopolist's profit maximizing cost. In a competitive market, each firm's supply decision can be analyzed without knowing the demand curve, but that is not true in a monopoly market. Therefore, we never talk about a monopoly's supply curve. Case study: Monopoly drugs versus generic drugs. According to our analysis, prices are determined differently in monopolized markets and competitive markets. A natural place to test this theory is the market for pharmaceutical drugs because this market takes on both market structures. When a firm discovers a new drug, patent laws give the firm a monopoly on the sale of that drug. But eventually, the firm's patent runs out and any company can make and sell the drug. At that time, the market switches from being monopolistic to being competitive. What should happen to the price of a drug? When the patent runs out, figure 6 shows the market for a typical drug. In this figure, the marginal cost of producing the drug is constant. This is approximately true for many drugs. During the life of the patent, the monopoly firm maximizes profit by producing the quantity at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost and charging a price well above marginal cost. But when the patent runs out, the profit from making the drug should encourage new firms to enter the market. As the market becomes more competitive, the price should fall to equal marginal cost. Experience is, in fact, consistent with our theory. When the patent on a drug expires, other companies quickly enter and begin selling generic products that are chemically identical to the former monopolistic brand name product. Just as our analysis predicts, the price of the competitively produced generic drug is well below the price that the monopolist was charging. The expiration of a patent, however, does not cause the monopolist to lose all of its market power. Some consumers remain loyal to the brand name drug, perhaps out of fear that the new generic drugs are not actually the same as the drug they have been using for years. As a result, the former monopolist can continue to charge the price charged by its new competitors. For example, one of the most widely used antidepressants is the drug fluoxetine, which is taken by millions of Americans because the patent on this drug expired in 2001. A consumer today has the choice between the original drug sold under the brand name Prozac and generic version of the same medicine. Prozac sells for about 3 times the price of generic fluoxetine. This price differential can persist because some consumers are not convinced that the two pills are perfect substitutes. Quick quiz. Explain how a monopolist chooses the quantity of output to produce and the price to charge. The welfare cost of monopolies. In monopoly, a good way to organize a market. We have seen that monopoly, in contrast to a competitive firm, charges a price above marginal cost. From the standpoint of consumers, this high price makes monopoly undesirable. At the same time, however, the monopoly is earning profit from charging this high price. From the standpoint of the owner of the firm, the high price makes monopoly very desirable. Is it possible that the benefits to the firm's owner exceeds the cost imposed on consumers, making monopoly desirable from the standpoint of society as a whole? We can answer this question using the tools of welfare economics. Recall from chapter 7 that total surplus measures the economic well-being of buyers and sellers in a market. Total surplus is the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Consumer surplus is consumers' willingness to pay for a good minus the amount they actually pay for it. Producer's surplus is the amount producers receive for a good minus that their cost of producing it. In this case, there is a single producer, the monopolist. You can probably guess the result of this analysis. In chapter 7, we concluded that the equilibrium of supply and demand in a competitive market is not only a natural outcome but also a desirable one. The invisible hand of the market leads to an allocation of resources that makes total surplus as large as it can be. Because a monopoly leads to an allocation of resources different from that in a competitive market, the outcome must in some way fail to maximize total economic well-being. The dead weight loss. We begin by considering what the monopoly firm would do if it were run by a benevolent social planner. The social planner cares not only about the profit earned by the firm's owner but also about the benefits received by the firm's consumers. The planner tries to maximize total surplus, which equals producer surplus profit plans plus consumer surplus. Keep in mind that total surplus equals the value of the good to consumer minus the cost of making the good incurred by the monopoly and producer. Figure 7 analyzes how a benevolent social planner would choose the monopoly's level of output. The demand curve reflects the value of the good to consumers measured by their willingness to pay for it. The marginal cost curve reflects the cost of the monopolist. Thus, the socially efficient quantity is found where the demand curve and the marginal cost curve intersect. Below this quantity, the value of an extra unit to consumers exceeds the cost of providing it. So, increasing output would raise total surplus. Above this quantity, the cost of producing an extra unit exceeds the value of that unit to consumers. So, decreasing output would raise total surplus. At the optimal quantity, the value of an extra unit to consumers exactly equals the marginal cost of production. If the social planner were running the monopoly, the firm could achieve this efficient outcome by charging the price found at the intersection of the demand and marginal cost curve. Thus, like a competitive firm and unlike a profit maximizing monopoly, a social planner would charge a price equal to the marginal cost because this price would give consumers an accurate signal about the cost of producing the good. Consumer would buy the efficient quantity. We can evaluate the welfare effect of monopoly by comparing the level of output that monopolist chooses to level of the output that social planner would choose. As we have seen, the monopolist chooses to produce and sell the quantity of output at which the marginal revenue and marginal cost curve intersect. The social planner would choose the quantity at which the demand and marginal cost curves intersect. Figure 8 shows the comparison. The monopolist produces less than the socially efficient quantity of output. We can also view the inefficiency of monopoly in terms of the monopolist's price because the market demand curve describes a negative relationship between the price and quantity of the good. A quantity that is inefficiently low is equivalent to a price that is inefficiently high. When a monopolist charge a price above marginal cost, when a monopolist charge a price above a marginal cost, some potential consumers value the good at more than its marginal cost but less than the monopolist's price. These consumers do not buy the good because the value these consumers place on the good is greater than the cost of providing it to them. This result is inefficient. Thus, monopoly pricing prevents some mutually beneficial trades from taking place. The inefficiency of monopoly can be measured with a deadweight loss triangle as illustrated in figure 8 because the demand curve reflects the value to consumers and the marginal cost curve reflects the cost to the monopoly producer. The area of the deadweight loss triangle between the demand curve and the marginal cost curve equals the total surplus loss because of monopoly pricing. It represents the reduction in economic well-being that results from the monopoly's use of its market power. The deadweight loss caused by a monopoly is similar to the deadweight loss caused by a tax. Indeed, a monopolist is like a private tax collector. As we saw in chapter 8, a tax on a good places a wedge between consumers' willingness to pay as reflected by the demand curve and producers' cost as reflected by the supply curve. Because a monopoly exerts its market power by charging a price above marginal cost, it creates a similar wedge. In both cases, the wedge causes the quantity sold to fall short of the social optimum. The difference between the two cases is that the government gets the revenue from a tax, whereas a private firm gets the monopoly profit. The monopoly's profit, a social cost. It is tempting to decry monopolies from profiteering at the expense of the public. And indeed, a monopoly firm does not earn a profit by virtue of its market power. According to the economic analysis of monopoly, however, the firm's profit is not in itself necessarily a problem for society. Welfare in a monopolized market, as in all markets, includes the welfare of both consumers and producers. Whenever a consumer pays an extra dollar to a producer because of a monopoly price, the consumer is worse off by a dollar and the producer is better off by the same amount. This transfer from consumer of the good to the owner of the monopoly does not affect the market's total surplus, the sum of consumer and producer surplus. In other words, the monopoly profit itself represents not a reduction in the size of the economic pie but merely a bigger slice for producer and smaller slice for consumers. Unless consumers are for some reason more deserving than producers, a normative judgment about equity that goes beyond the realm of economic efficiency. The monopoly profit is not a social problem. The problem in a monopolized market arises because the firm produces and sells a quantity of output below the level that maximizes total surplus. The deadweight loss measures how much the economic pie shrinks as a result. This inefficiency is connected to the monopoly's high price. Consumers buy fewer units when the firm raises its price above marginal cost. But keep in mind that the profit earned on the units that continue to be sold is not the problem. The problem stems from the inefficiently low quantity of output. Put differently, if the high monopoly price did not discourage some consumer from buying the good, it would raise producer surplus by exactly the amount it reduced consumer surplus, leaving total surplus the same as that achieving by a benevolent social planner. There is, however, a possible exception to this conclusion. Suppose that a monopoly firm has to incur additional costs to maintain its monopoly position. For example, a firm with government created monopoly might need to hire lobbyists to convince lawmakers to convene sorry might need to hire lobbyists to convince the lawmakers to continue its monopoly. In this case, the monopoly may use up some of its monopoly profits, paying for these additional costs. The social loss from monopoly includes both these costs and deadweight loss resulting from reduced output. Quick quiz. How does a monopolist's quantity of output compare to the quantity of output that maximizes total surplus? How does this difference relate to the deadweight loss? Price discrimination. So far, we have been assuming that the monopoly firm charges the same price to all customers. Yet, in many cases, firms sell the same good to different customers for different prices, even though the cost of producing for the two customers are the same. This practice is called price discrimination. Before discussing the behavior of a price discrimination monopolist, we should note that price discrimination is not possible when a good is sold in a competitive market. In a competitive market, many firms are selling the same good as the market price. No firm is willing to charge a lower price to any customer because the firm can sell all it wants as at the market price. And if any firm tried to charge a higher price to a customer that a customer would buy from another firm, for a firm to price discriminate, it must have some market power. A parable about pricing. To understand why a monopolist would price discriminate, let's consider an example. Imagine that you are the president of Redalut Publishing Company. Redalut's best-selling author has just written a new novel. To keep things simple, let's imagine that you pay the author a flat $2 million for the exclusive rights to publish the book. Let's also assume that the cost of printing the book is zero, as it would be, for example, for an ebook. Read a lot. So profit, therefore, is the revenue from selling the book minus the $2 million it has paid to the author. Given these assumptions, how would you, a Read-Aloud's president, decide the book's price? You first step it to estimate the demand for the book. Read-Aloud's marketing department tell you that the book will attract two types of readers. The book will appeal to the author's 1 lakh diehard fans who are willing to pay as much as $30. In addition, it will appeal to 4 lakh less enthusiastic readers who will pay up to $5. If Read Aloud charges a single price to all customers, what price maximizes profit? There are two natural prices to consider. $30 is the highest price Read Aloud can charge and still get the 1 lakh diehard fans, and $5 is the highest price it can charge and still get the entire market of 5 lakh potential readers. Solving Read Aloud's problem is a matter of simple arithmetic. At a price of $30, Read Aloud sells 1 lakh copies, has revenue of $3 million, and makes profit of $1 million. At a price of $5, it sells 5 lakh copies, has revenue of $2.5 million, and makes profit of $5 lakh. Thus, Read Aloud maximizes profit by charging $30 and forging the opportunity to sell to the 4 lakh less enthusiastic readers. Notice that Read Aloud's decision causes a deadweight loss. There are 4 lakh readers willing to pay $5 for the book, and the marginal cost of providing it to them is zero. Thus, $2 million of total surplus is lost when Read Aloud charges the higher price. The deadweight loss is inefficiency that arises whenever a monopolist charges a price above marginal cost. Now, suppose that Read Aloud's marketing department makes a discovery. These two groups of readers are in separate markets. The diehard fans live in Australia and the other readers live in United States. Moreover, it is hard for readers in one country to buy a book in the other. In response to this discovery, Read Aloud can change its marketing strategy and increase profits. To the 1 lakh Australian readers, it can charge $30 for the book. To the 4 lakh American readers, it can charge $5 for the book. In this case, revenue is $3 million. In Australia and $2 million in United States for a total of $5 million. Profit is then $3 million, which is substantially greater than the $1 million the company could earn charging the same $13 price to all customers. Not surprisingly, Read Aloud chooses to follow the strategy of price discrimination. The story of Read Aloud publishing is hypothetical, but it describes the business practice of many publishing companies. Consider the price differential between hardcover books and paperbacks. When a publisher has a new novel, it initially releases an expensive hardcover edition and later releases a cheaper paperback edition. The difference in price between these two editions far exceeds the difference in pricing cost. The publisher is price discriminating by selling the hardcover to die-hard fans and paperback to less enthusiastic readers, thereby increasing its profit. The moral of the story: like any parable, the story of Read Aloud publishing is stylized, yet also like any parable, it teaches some general lessons. In this case, three lessons can be learned about price discrimination. The first and most obvious lesson is that price discrimination The first and most obvious lesson is that price discrimination is a rational strategy for a profit maximizing monopolist. That is, by charging different prices to different customers, a monopolist can increase its profit. In essence, a price discriminating monopolist charges each customer a price closer to her willingness to pay than is possible with a single price. The second lesson is that price discrimination requires the ability to separate customers according to their willingness to pay. In our example, customers were separated geographically, but sometimes monopolists choose other differences such as age or income to distinguish among customers. A corollary to this second lesson is that certain market forces can prevent firms from price discriminating. In particular, one such force is arbitrage, the process of buying a good in one market at low price and selling it in another market at higher price to profit from the price difference. In our example, if Australian bookstores could buy the book in the United States and resell it to Australian readers, the arbitrage would prevent Read Aloud from price discriminating because no Australian would buy the book at higher price. The third lesson from our parable is that, most surprising, price discrimination can erase economic welfare. Recall that a dead weight loss arises when Read Aloud charges a single $30 price because of 4 lakh less enthusiastic readers do not end up with the book, even though they value it at more than its marginal cost of production. By contrast, when Read Aloud price discriminates, all readers get the book and the outcome is efficient. Thus, price discrimination can eliminate the inefficiency inherent in monopoly pricing. Note that in this example, the increase in welfare from price discrimination shows up as higher producer surplus rather than higher consumer surplus. Consumers are no better off for having bought the book. The price they pay exactly equals the value they place on the book. So they receive no consumer surplus. The entire increase in total surplus from price discrimination accrues to Read Aloud publishing in the form of higher profit. The analytics of price discrimination. Let's consider a bit more formally how price discrimination affects economic welfare. We begin by assuming that the monopolist can discriminate perfectly. Perfect price discrimination describes a situation in which the monopolist knows exactly each customer's willingness to pay and can charge each customer a different price. In this case, the monopolist charges each customer exactly her willingness to pay, and the monopolist gets the entire surplus in every transaction. Figure 9 illustrates producers and consumers surplus with and without price discrimination. To keep things simple, this figure is drawn assuming constant per unit cost, that is, marginal cost and average total cost are constant and equal. Without price discrimination, the firm charges a single price above marginal cost, as shown in panel A. Because some potential customers who value the good at more than marginal cost do not buy it this high price, the monopoly causes a deadweight loss. Yet, when a firm can perfectly price discriminate, as shown in panel B, each customer who values the good at more than marginal cost buys the good and its charge or her willingness to pay. All mutually beneficial trade takes place, no deadweight loss occurs, and entire surplus derived from the market goes to the monopoly producer in the form of profit. In reality, of course, price discrimination is not perfect. Customers do not walk into stores with signs displaying their willingness to pay. Instead, confirms this price discriminate by dividing customers into groups: young versus old, weekdays versus weekend shoppers, American versus Australians, and so on. Unlike those in our parable of read aloud publishing, customers within each group differ in their willingness to pay for the product, making perfect price discrimination impossible. How does this imperfect price discrimination affect welfare? The analysis of these pricing schemes is complicated, and it turns out that there is no general answer to this question. Compared with the single price monopoly outcomes, imperfect price discrimination can raise, lower, or leave unchanged the total surplus in a market. The only certain conclusion is that price discrimination raises the monopoly's profit. Otherwise, the firm would choose to charge all customers the same price. Examples of price discrimination. Firms in our economy use various business strategies aimed at charging different prices to different customers. Now that we understand the economics of price discrimination, let's consider some new example. Movie tickets. Many movie theaters charge a lower price for children and senior citizens than for other patrons. This fact is hard to explain in a competitive market. In a competitive market, price equals marginal cost, and the marginal cost of providing a seat for a child or senior citizen is the same as the marginal cost of providing a seat for anyone else. Yet the differential pricing is easily explained. If movie theaters have some local monopoly powers, and if children and senior citizens have a lower willingness to pay for a ticket, in this case movie theaters raise their profit by price